In this video, you're going to see the revival of the United States of America starting in the year 2666. This is all thanks to the amazing Total Conversion mod After the End, which recently released on the Steam Workshop. It's a massive mod featuring a post-apocalyptic North and South America, which I checked out on Steam recently and liked enough to make a video about. There are tons of different faiths, cultures, and regions to play in this mod, and I'll try to cover other interesting places later. But for now, we're sticking with the flagship region of the game, the East Coast of America, where there's a unique presidential election system and so much more. This video is not meant to be a review or proper look at the mod mechanics in depth, but rather a story set in the world of the mod. If you're more interested in the actual mod mechanics themselves, check out my Twitch stream where I focus much more on the actual gameplay. Without further ado, let's revive America in this GIGACHAD story. There are all kinds of potential choices for who can unite America, whether it's down in the evangelical South, up north in the occult forests and seas of New England, or somewhere in between. In this case, I'll be dropping in as Speaker Thaddeus Theobald of New York, since he's a true American. He's a constitutionalist, which is a form of Americanism. In case you don't know, Americanism is a religion which worships the founding fathers of America and uses the Constitution as a sort of holy text, with different sects representing different perspectives on the Constitution. Starting off, New York is one of the few metropolitan centers remaining after the world ended. Manhattan, although a small county, is worth far more than any other county in the area. The District of New York, for now, is composed of Manhattan, Brooklyn, Middlesex, and Bergen. Surveying the area, Thaddeus saw that he was surrounded by relatively friendly realms who were acting unwittingly as buffer states between him and some scary enemies. To his north, the Principalist Americans of Connecticut kept Manhattan safe from the radical Mayflower Society of Boston. To the south, Jersey acted as a borderland between Manhattan and the Christians of Dover. The larger kingdoms towards the interior of Hudsonia and GIGACHAD were relatively peaceful, thankfully, with the spiritualist Hudsonians being unwilling to fight and the Amish of GIGACHAD being against war in principle. Expansion was certainly an idea for the New York Gothamites. Americanism was the best ideology to bring freedom and prosperity to the region, but it would be hard to justify fighting other Americanists in the region. Thaddeus himself was already so old that he likely wouldn't be able to accomplish much before passing the Republic on to whoever wins the next election anyway. He had one more son, John Adams, before deciding that if he was going to pass away, it wouldn't be without a fight. Colonel Ellis of Connecticut, although an Americanist, was an easy target, and he ruled a borough that belonged to New York, Westchester. Rather anticlimactically though, just as the war began, Thaddeus passed away, and his son, Chad, lost the election for the Republic. Emma of Bergen won the election, and as an Amriki Muslim, she was somewhat assimilated to the ways of the Americanists, but ultimately held loyalty to powers outside of the Constitution. Chad still held on to New York as a mayor there, and decided it would be a good idea to help Emma win the war against Connecticut, which she chose to continue despite Thaddeus' death. A victory for New York, even if he doesn't control it, is still a victory nonetheless. During the war, an election to choose the president began, and since all the candidates were from nowhere nearby, it didn't really matter much who won, except that it ought to be a constitutionalist, so that Washington could be in the right hands. Ultimately, a Floridian Imaginarian, Elias, won the election, which was unfortunate. In better news, the war with Connecticut was going well, as Westchester was occupied, and the enemy forces in Bergen defeated soundly. One benefit of fighting in this war, despite not being the war leader, is that Chad is certainly presenting himself as a loyal subject to the District of New York, which is earning him a high place with Speaker Emma. Everyone, including Emma herself, put their vote in for Chad, and the war was ended in May of 2670. The Speaker was already 58, so although Chad considered an assassination, it was probably unnecessary. With time, he'll get the district back fair and square. After the war, Chad focused his efforts on building up Manhattan more, and on raising his brother John Adams and his daughter Publicia. One of them could be the next Speaker of New York, and he intends to prepare both of them for the possibility. In June of 2672, Emma passed away, and Chad was of course elected as the new Speaker. He's got control of New York again, and he has plans for this little district. Chad embarked on a massive military and political campaign to convince Americanists across America that he would bring about freedom and the end of tyranny. He promised that he would create a world where the Constitution and the Holy Founding Fathers would rule. It would take war though, and even though the Constitution is of course an inherently peaceful document, sometimes war was the only way. The campaign began in 2674 with the invasion of the Jewish holdouts in North Jersey. Any who did not submit to the Constitution had to be swept aside. Raritan was conquered in just 7 months, and although an easy target, this was a strong start to the New York campaign. The more impressive conquest would be against the spiritualist kingdom of Hudsonia, which controlled territory in the legal land of Gotham. Initially, the army occupied some land along the Hudson River before returning back to fight the spiritualist armies who were ready to practice self-defense when necessary. After the battle there, and after another occupation in Ramapo, the war was ended, with New York advancing further up the river and proving that a small district can take on a much larger kingdom with great leadership. The next target was the Amish, who also had some land in Gotham. The Skylands to the south were the new target, and the Amish were ready to fight. They had heard of the Gothamite campaign to bring about a new America, and in hearing that, they chose to prepare for war, even if it was anathema to their faith. In an amazing show of martial ability, the Amish forces had amassed almost 7,000 men to confront the Gothamite army of just 3,500. Both sides believed that the Amish would win, just on numbers, and the commanders were discussing retreating to preserve life. But Chad simply unfurled his personal copy of the Constitution and put his finger on the Second Amendment, saying, "Soldiers, only we have the right to bear arms, so granted to us by our founding fathers. Would you so kindly confiscate the illegal arms of those tyrants over the ridge?" His confidence evoked the stoic and strong will of the founding fathers, and feeling newly motivated, the army took its place on the hill of the Skylands, preparing to die for their country. The hill was their saving grace in the end, with the Amish cavalry being unable to get up the hill, and the tactful placement of armored shock troops at key points on the hill. The Amish charged bravely, but didn't have the will to fight how the Americanist army did. Amish warriors, in concept, were as oxymoronic as their commanders were inexperienced, and so the battle shifted away from defense to offense for the New York armies. After the Amish began retreating, the army descended the hill and soundly defeated their enemies. Chad was hailed a worthy speaker and future president. After returning home to relieve Westchester, the army met a significantly smaller force in the Skylands and soundly defeated them. The Skylands were taken, but what was more, Chad established himself across the Americanist world with his founding father-like stoicism. There was no time for ceremony, though. The campaign continued, moving to Long Island, ruled by Connecticut. Although Ellis of New Haven was an Americanist, his personal choice to be a tyrant as a feudalist doomed him to be an enemy of the new America. Long Island fell in just 9 months, with Ellis being captured and surrendering. New York has already expanded greatly, but rather than keep the momentum up, Chad spent some time giving his troops time off. They were people that needed family and leisure time just as anyone else would. He spent his leisure time going on a hunt in the newly conquered territories, seeking out a buck whose horns he could hang in his hall. He did find a buck, and although he missed the shot with his bow, he succeeded in the hunt anyway because of a bug. One day this will be fixed, surely. Upon returning home, Chad spent time with family and later on had his first son, Dwight. He had arranged for an alliance in the meantime with the Old Dominion in the south, hoping to find friends that could help him in his campaign, but he instead only found anchors that dragged his men around. It wasn't completely pointless to help an ally in need, as it did act as a great PR campaign, but it was frustrating to waste his men's lives on conflicts that didn't matter. Either way, Chad amassed enough territory and gold that he could declare himself the governor of the newly born state of Gotham. When deciding what electoral system to implement, it was only natural that he would choose a stratocratic succession, which is based on military power. With the new state of Gotham behind him, Chad went to war with what remained of Connecticut again, taking all of New Haven, and then prepared for the presidential election of 2689. He, of course, voted for himself, and on January 8th, the votes were counted up, with Chad winning out over the other 3 candidates. Gotham, the rising power of the eastern seaboard, now held the presidency, and with that, Chad felt a new boldness guiding him. It was the spirit of the founding fathers who watched over him, knowing he was in the right. Out of character for a second, this event called High Republic New Order pops up when your primary title as a republic government has no election title law on it. I made the presidency my primary title, and that title can't have a title law on it, so this event just keeps popping up. Whenever I click, it doesn't actually change how presidential elections work, so if you see it come up throughout the video, don't worry about it. Eventually, I changed my primary title off of the presidency to get rid of the event spam, so it won't be here forever. Connecticut surrendered in 2691, and to celebrate his victory, in office and on the field, Chad proclaimed the reformation of the state of New Jersey. It didn't affect things much, but what was important was that his presidency start with an event that would put him in the history books. Of course, there's still much to do nonetheless. Despite his great leadership up till now, Chad was actually a controversial president. He had a lot of authority in his own state, and that authority was interpreted by some to mean tyranny. For that, several speakers in the Gotham House bore their arms, looking to regain freedom. New Haven, who had recently been subjugated, Long Island, and South Jersey all rose up, and luckily, they are far from each other, with Manhattan at the center. The goal here is to destroy each army before they can form up, and by doing that, the rebels fell easily. It did take some time, as the rebels were unwilling to surrender easily, but after losing so many battles and losing control of key cities in Long Island, the war ended in Chad's favor. As punishment for their treason, Long Island was confiscated for the president, and the rest of the speakers were forced to pay reparations for the war to secure their release from prison. By being somewhat forgiving, Chad showed that he was ultimately not a tyrant. The speakers were put in their place, and with that, the American campaign resumed. At least it would have resumed. But first, Chad took a trip to Chicago looking to investigate the lands of the industrialists. You see, in this world, not everyone worships the Constitution, or a god, or some other divinity. Some worship concepts, like industry, and others worship the works of people from before. I'm not very knowledgeable of the lore of After the End, by the way, so this might not quite be accurate to the true lore, but from my understanding, the industrialist faiths basically worship the great works of a people known as the Titans. Titans are figures from the past that accomplished great industrial feats, and industrialists try to emulate those achievements. For fear of being horribly wrong, I won't go much deeper, but for the purpose of the story, they're important because they dominate what is called the Steel Belt. Cities like Chicago and Detroit are, by this point, not relevant to Americanist politics, but one day they could be, and it'll be important to figure out if these industrialists will be cooperative or antagonistic with America. In Chicago, Chad made an effort to spread word of the rise of America, not in a threatening way, but almost like an offer. He was informing the people there that America was coming, and how America will treat her people will depend on their behavior. It was an offer, with a veiled threat. Most of the people in Chicago didn't care much though. Word of the Manhattan president had spread around, but for now, this was still only an East Coast problem. Regardless of the receptibility of the Chicago industrialists, Chad did demonstrate his reverence for the constitutional holy texts, and met some interesting people in the region. The lesson he took away with the most importance was that he needed the reputation of the presidency to strike a stronger sense of shock and awe in the various communities in the old American borders. The fact that the Chicago industrialists scoffed at him is an insult to the presidency, and so, to make that happen, Chad declared a war on Hudsonia, looking to conquer all of it for the presidency. His armies immediately descended on both Ulster and Albany, with the Hudsonians being locked in a civil war that left them unable to defend. Most of the Hudson River's coastline was occupied, and after a decisive battle in Saratoga, the Hudsonians were defeated and the entirety of the land returned to the presidency. Each district was handed out to loyal constitutionalist Gothamites with the hopes of bringing the heretical spiritualists to the light of the Constitution in good time. With the war over, Chad inherited a war from the district of Erie, which he quickly ended in a white peace before finding the cash to declare a new state. Gotham and Hudsonia had been carved out of the old world state of New York, or as it was now known, the Empire State, which Chad immediately refounded. The Empire State flourished with all the taxes and production of Hudsonia, and after a period of peaceful development, war returned to the docket. An inheritance mishap resulted in Philadelphia falling under the control of the Magic Kingdom. Philadelphia is an important holy place to constitutionalism, and these Imaginarians are certainly not fit holders of the holy site. During the war with the Magic Kingdom, a spiritualist rebellion rose up in Hudsonia, and it was doomed from the start. The armies were already raised and ready to go, so the spiritualists rose up only to have the presidential armies wipe the floor with them. After lowering the armies briefly and re-raising them outside of Philadelphia, Chad sent his forces to destroy the Magic Kingdom's armies. With a 5-1 advantage, there was no question who would win. Philadelphia was reclaimed and now held directly by President Chad. The next target for conquest would naturally be the Chowder folk of Boston. The Mayflower Society was anathema to the constitutionalist faith, as the Mayflower Society rejected presidential authority and didn't even participate in federal elections. Ivyland, centered around Boston, had to go. First, the Holy War for Connecticut would reduce the distance between the Empire State's borders and Boston itself. Ivyland is one of the more powerful opponents Chad had faced up till now. Nonetheless, victory was assured for the leader of the free world. In the forests of Litchfield, the Ivyland cavalry had difficulty against the Manhattan pikemen, and they were soundly defeated. The general of Ivyland, George, was captured, and with his capture, the army stood down, surrendering Connecticut to the president. The truce with Ivyland was abruptly ended when George died at home from the wounds he incurred in the war, and with that, an invasion of Massachusetts began, with the hope of again bringing the Empire State directly to Boston. With some occupations and a few battles, the region was added to the district, and before long, Boston too will fall, eradicating the Mayflower Society for good. All this marching around and conquest had ended up influencing the Gothamites in the form of a new cultural tradition called trail runners. This unlocks a new activity called a hike, which once the tradition is solidified, it's certain the president will embark on. During a minor war to reclaim some more land the Magic Kingdom unlawfully held around Philadelphia, for the first time in a very long time, another nation declared war on the President of America. Some radical Mayflower folk from New Hampshire declared war for Worcester, and although President Chad was busy near Philly, he remained confident that he could fend off these radicals. After occupying everything around Philadelphia and defeating the Magic Kingdom's armies, he re-raised the troops near Connecticut, hoping the Floridians wouldn't return before he could declare victory from his occupations. The New Hampshire armies had occupied significant territory out there, and these extremist Mayflower cultists fought hard to win. In the Battle of Hatfield, the presidential armies outnumbered the enemy, yet the ferocious Chowder folk won the day anyway. Thankfully, this war was just for Worcester, and so its loss wasn't too painful, but it was still the first military defeat in Chad's time as president. It happens here and there. The army returned south to defeat the Magic Kingdom as a nice morale boost before ending the war and returning to peace. As revenge for the New Hampshire incursion, Chad started a counterattack against Ivyland to explicitly take New Hampshire. The hope was that by attacking the Ivyland general, the armies would be weaker than the more centralized and motivated speaker of New Hampshire. During the war, construction of a great constitutional temple in Philadelphia completed, marking it as a hub of constitutionalist power. Afterwards, while campaigning in Ivyland, Chad ended up suddenly passing away, presumably from all the effort he put into his rulership. At the age of 66, Chad passed away, leaving his son Dwight to rule. On account of Chad's great leadership, his son won every local election, but of course the presidency was relinquished so that a new president could be chosen. Senator Dwight continued the war in his father's name and conquered New Hampshire. From there, he took a controversial decision, and that was to occupy Washington to reclaim it for the Empire State. Attacking President Splendora was tantamount to sacrilege, but he justified it by saying he was not attacking the president, but rather the administration of Washington. Of course, critics simply said that the presidency was the administration of Washington, but in the uncertainty came enough political plausibility that conquest could be allowed. Nonetheless, after easily taking Washington, the president simply walked into Washington and brought it back under the presidency. I learned this in this playthrough, but it turns out that Washington always goes back to the president if an Americanist owns it. So yeah, unless you're a non-Americanist, conquering Washington is pointless. Looking for inspiration, Dwight took a long trip to Mount Rushmore. See, following up a presidency like Chad's was always tough, since the expectations had shot up to immense levels. Hopefully, by seeing some of the faces of the Holy Founding Fathers, it would be possible to find inspiration. Dwight took a detour through much of the interesting cities of the East, visiting Montreal, Toronto, Boston, Chicago, and Detroit. He arrived in Mount Rushmore and took in the Holy Spirit of the Founding Fathers, but found little inspiration. At the end of the day, the mountain was just a mountain, with the visages of people from time immemorial. Dwight was welcomed home by an insurrection from his vassals, looking to take away senatorial power, but which was definitely reassuring. If anything, this would at least be an opportunity to prove himself on the battlefield, but Dwight definitely didn't feel like he could live up to Chad's legacy with something like this going on. The Civil War was certainly not as straightforward as previous wars had been, with battles going in either side's favor and occupations being traded regularly. A critical battle in Rockland saw the rebels split their armies due to some unclear commands, and with that, Dwight secured a decisive victory. He followed it up with another battle to the south, facing a smaller revolting force, and after occupying New Haven, the war was clearly in his favor. With a few more battles and a couple more occupations, the war was over, and Dwight had successfully won a major civil war, setting the tone for his reign just a little bit more positively than before. He decided to go on a hike, but out of character here, the hike activity isn't localized at all, so there isn't much to say about it. It did hand out some traveler traits and traveler XP to the attendees, which was cool, but yeah, I'll wait to do more of those until they're localized for sure. In order to truly prove himself, Dwight decided he would finish the fight his father began, and invaded Boston, hoping to eliminate the Mayflower cult as soon as possible. He was emboldened by his Civil War victory, and so went for the proper city of Boston itself. His army was, by just about every metric, superior to the Bostonian army, and so it was a total victory for the Empire State. Dwight made Boston part of his personal territory, while allocating its surroundings to loyal speakers from Manhattan. He did not sit on his laurels, though, as having conquered Boston, Dwight completed his father's ambitions, but it was time for a new ambition all his own. He invaded the Amish kingdom of Dutchland, seeking to eradicate these pests on the frontier. Pacifism, and the worship of God, was incompatible with the Constitution's all-seeking philosophy of liberty, and so the Amish had to be wiped out. This was an extremely popular war, with Americanists everywhere happy to see the expansion of the Americanist homelands back to where they ought to be. While the Amish capital and hinterlands were being sieged, the cowardly army had gone to the Potomac highlands to try and attack innocent civilians who they felt would be easier targets. It was only natural that pacifists were ultimately just thinly veiled cowards. Dwight sent the army south to the Potomac River and confronted the Amish in battle, where they were soundly defeated. With their defeat, the Empire State was looking majestic on the maps and had control over much of Atlantica. In time, Dwight amassed enough wealth to declare himself the new Vice President of Atlantica. Obviously, he couldn't take on the title of president without actually being elected in Washington, but he could certainly be the arm of the presidency, acting on its behalf whenever he doesn't actually hold it himself. Atlantica was a massive rebirth of Americanist ideals, and with it came hope for the Constitution and the revival of a free America. In order to bring about this new America, it was paramount that the evangelicals of the South be unseated, and thus they became the new focus for the Vice President Dwight. He first needed access to the South, and so he invaded the Old Dominion, which illegally held land in Atlantica. Funnily enough, their presidency had an alliance with the Old Dominion, and because of that, the Vice President and the President were now at war, but Americanist politics can be like that sometimes. During the war, Dwight was commanding his officers and overseeing the war in general, as is his role, but one day, after a sleepless night of maneuvering and ideating, he started to speak erratically and his face was twitching strangely. He limped around, unaware of his own state, before suddenly collapsing into a seizure. He had suffered a massive stroke and was left comatose, but alive. The war continued without Dwight's input, with the realm hoping he'd recover, but it looked like he wouldn't. Ultimately, the Old Dominion crumbled, and with their defeat, there was a land border between the Southern Holy Columbian Commonwealth, which had chosen God over America in the wake of the apocalypse. Rather than immediately engage in hostilities, though, it was time to prepare the country for a long conflict against the evangelicals. This is where two huge empires, one northern and one southern, would come to blows. But thankfully, the Southerners were stuck in their own internal conflicts, while Atlantica was strong, united, and rich. Unfortunately, though, Atlantica was struck with a comatose vice president, and so elections to choose the new vice president would have to begin soon enough. The best candidate for the job so far seemed to be Franklin Theobald, Dwight's brother, and this was on account of him being another one of Chad's sons. Chad had so strongly forged the Atlantican identity that the speakers of the House would prefer one of his sons over a younger and perhaps more competent candidate. Franklin was the new vice president-elect, and all that was needed now was to wait for Dwight to pass away, so that power could be transferred. In November of 2730, Dwight passed away, and his brother Franklin won the elections across every district in the state. Franklin is just 2 years younger than his brother Dwight, but he's healthier, and some say, possessed by the spirit of the Holy Fathers. He's much more diplomatic though than Dwight, but that doesn't mean he's weak. Franklin fully intends to bring war to the Holy Columbian Commonwealth, but in good time. First, he's got to secure his vice presidency. In the ancient history of America, there was a time when the North and the South had been divided. The Great Civil War, which would define much of American history and politics in the decades before the apocalypse, was something that most Americanists were unaware of by this time. It was ancient history for sure, but some in the government felt that there was something of an evocation of that era with this reorientation towards the South. Some believed that Atlantica was already a great enough union, and that the South, in their choice to favor God, had effectively exited the union. But on the other end of the argument, it was believed that no state could secede except through war. In effect, the Holy Columbian Commonwealth was an illegitimate state that never formally seceded, and so it had to be returned, but it was only natural that this would be a long process, and one which would need blood, sweat, and tears. Right off the bat, yet another civil war began, with the speakers demanding more rights, but Franklin bucked the trend by allowing them to have those rights. He spoke in Manhattan saying that executive powers had been raised in these dire times, but as Atlantica had gained its power and begun to slowly reinstitute American control over the eastern seaboard, the need for overreaching executive power is finally ending. That doesn't mean all authority has been relinquished, but some can be for sure. Rather than move south right away, Franklin started his military campaigns in Tennessee by inviting a claimant to the tribes there, and propping him up as a new governor for that land. Like I said, Franklin is far more diplomatic than Dwight, so he's intending to prop up pretenders where he can. The reason he's interested in Tennessee is that by taking it, he'll be cutting off the evangelicals from expanding in that direction. That, and Tennessee controlled some portions of the legal territory of both Atlantica and the Commonwealth, so they had to be removed anyway. During the war, the armies ran past each other to siege, but thanks to Franklin's siege equipment, he made it to Nashville much faster than the Tennessee armies, who were floundering in the backwater borderlands of the Potomac River. Once Nashville fell, the enemy armies did return to fight in Bristol, but the Atlantican armies were overwhelmingly powerful in comparison. They defeated the army, sent it retreating to Nashville, and then wiped them out, ending the war. Tennessee was now the first Atlantican territory, as it was not governed by an elected ruler, but a sort of client king, Lamar Kane. By controlling Tennessee, the Commonwealth has nowhere to go. In 2736, a new presidential election began, with the obvious choice being Vice President Franklin. It was a long-standing tradition that when the president passes away, the vice president ought to take over anyway. With an astounding majority, Franklin won the election, taking control of Washington and the reins of the free world. His presidential term began with a trip to Mount Rushmore to pay homage to the Founding Fathers, as he would be carrying out their will, and after he returned, it was time to take the heartlands of the Commonwealth. Curiously, the Commonwealth somehow had abandoned Christianity and embraced a Christian syncretic, Afro-diasporic faith called the Hoodoo. No matter their own strange internal conflicts, they were still separatists that had to be reintegrated. The old state of Georgia was the target of Franklin's war on the Commonwealth, and although the Commonwealth saw it coming, they had not appropriately prepared to resist the Atlantican armies. One half of the army marched deep into Georgia to siege and wreak havoc, while the other half hunted for Commonwealth armies. They met on the field in Waxhaws, I don't know how to say that word, with a decisive presidential victory. After a couple more occupations and battles, the Commonwealth surrendered the state of Georgia, and with it, their heartland. The South was not completely out of the fight, but they were suddenly without a huge tract of land which composed their wealthiest territories. War only continued though, with the remnants of the Mayflower cultists in Ivyland being something of a victory lap. Back in Georgia, Senator Dante was appointed to rule the new state there, and then, with an immense audacity, the other speakers and governors of the empire rose up for more liberty. Although Franklin demonstrated kindness before giving up more rights last time, he would not be so kind this time. War broke out, mostly in the north, and these unruly speakers will be put down for it. During the war, opportunists from New England declared war, looking for easy pickings in Ivyland. They'll get their due in time. Some occupations, some battles, and a bit of determination led to a victory for the federal government in 2744. The federal treasury was looking pretty barren after all this civil war, and so, as recompense for the rebellion, most of the local speakers and governors were released with fines, and so stability returned to Atlantica. Up in New England, Maine was easily defeated as they were relying on the president having his hands too full to fight back. They were pushed back into their desolate land and made to pay war reparations, albeit they didn't have much to give, unfortunately. The next war target was the Old Dominion, who was easily conquered, and now created a much larger border with the Commonwealth, which was only to the Atlanticans' advantage. Before being able to continue his campaigns though, Franklin, who remember was not much younger than Dwight, reached an old enough age that he could no longer keep up with his useful armies. Like the previous presidents, his death came on quite suddenly. For the most part, he had been completely normal, before rather suddenly feeling all of his years catch up with him. He passed away in 2747, with the Senate choosing his nephew, Hamilton, to rule next. Hamilton is one of the many sons of Dwight who was raised to be a potential president in the future. Hamilton is a solid choice for president thanks to his comprehensive knowledge of the Constitution, but he's a bit bookish for a vice president. He doesn't have the spine and strong will of an optimal presidential choice, but his large stature betrayed his more craven propensities. Hamilton, nonetheless, had inherited the mantle of reunifying America, and he certainly does not want to let his people down. Hamilton's vice presidency was ultimately met with resistance, despite him being legally elected to it, as several speakers demanded yet more rights, and Hamilton was advised to not give in to them. He was a bit afraid of war, but he also understood that the Constitution granted him executive powers that could not just be stripped away when asked. The rebels were centered in South Jersey, and on account of their proximity to Manhattan, Hamilton did defeat the rebels easily. Nonetheless, Hamilton failed to demonstrate true courage, mostly hiding away in Manhattan during the war, rather than really commanding his men. Sometimes a ruler must replace their flaws with mythology, and so a legend about Hamilton slaying a dragon using his Second Amendment right to bear arms began. The dragon, an enemy of freedom and the Constitution, had to be slain as a form of property defense after it broke the non-aggression principle by burning down a building. That's America speak for slaying a dragon with a gun because it attacked a town. I'm actually not sure if there are guns in this mod's lore, but we'll roll with it. Afterwards, shocking news of a massive plague spreading across the west of the continent reached Manhattan. The Black Death was coming. For now, it was far away, so everything should be fine in the short term. With luck, this massive plague might weaken the south more, but time will tell. It seemed to be spreading throughout the entire west coast, with California being absolutely ravaged. The plagues were spread to the south by hopping from Central America into the Caribbean and then into Florida, where, thankfully, it seemed to mostly stop. It barely reached into Manhattan before failing to advance further, and although it was unfortunate that it got that far, it was nice that it wasn't going any further. Out of character, the plague has a maximum number of provinces it can affect, and because after the end is a huge map, the plague hit its cap before it could go further. Either way, the plague was affecting the Commonwealth a lot more than it was affecting Atlantica, so the wars were continued, and this is where not a ton really happens. More war, more development, and surviving the plague is most of what goes on for almost all of Hamilton's presidency. After taking control of Lynchburg, Hamilton demolished a holy chapel there, turning it into scraps for monuments of his own, which would have been an affront to the Commonwealth, but because of their conversion to hoodoo, they actually didn't care much for it. Another event, which for now doesn't mean much, but which may in the future have massive consequences, the advent of the consumerist movement in Chicago. Consumerism is essentially the worship of money and the ritualization of the spending of it. The consumerists will likely band together to form some sort of corporate vanguard in the near future, and whether they'll butt heads with America will be based on how they do against the industrialists. Hamilton's reign continued without much else going on as he settled into a more peaceful America. The Commonwealth did still exist, but its power was so drained that it was truly nothing to worry about anymore. Back in Chicago, Chief Executive Trust Fund of the Rockefeller House led the corporate vanguard, and it would be quite likely that one day he would come to face American wrath. That day wasn't for some time. Another religious movement, one much more tolerable, came up as well in 2763, the United Arsenals of America. These are essentially industrialists that are dedicated to the construction of great works that glorify America and the Constitution. The industrialists, if they could be convinced to follow this America-centric version of their beliefs, could actually be quite the asset for this reborn America. The industrialists were nonetheless under threat, and so Hamilton took it on himself to try and protect them. He completed his dragon-slaying legend and used it to demand fealty from his neighbors, which he first used on the presidency to formally subsume the president into Atlantica. This would prove futile later on, as the president gains independence after being subjugated, but I didn't know that, so I'll pretend it never happened. Next, he fought Alleghania, which is basically just Pennsylvania. This region is a huge block of industrialists that make a buffer between the rising consumerists and America, so having them under American protection will be hugely useful. Unfortunately, before the war could be won, the ruler in Alleghania was dethroned, invalidating the war. Then, while defending against the French Canadians in the north, Hamilton passed away, and in his place, his cousin David, the senator of Ivyland, and funnily enough, Hamilton's rival, took his place. David, the senator of Dice from Ivyland, came to power, and he was an extremely militarily oriented ruler. David Theobald had been plotting his own election from Ivyland for a long time. He had come to power and developed a distaste for Hamilton's cowardice. He wiped the floor with the French Canadians and then announced to his people that this would not be a pointless, wasteful vice presidency. This is going to be an American presidency. David, possessed with the true spirit of American interventionism, made it his life goal to re-establish America. He held a feast in Manhattan to explain to the governors and speakers of his realm that they were going to be known as the founders of a new America, and all they had to do was follow him to glory if they wanted it. To bring about the United States again, David would have to prove himself worthy, and so, even though he didn't need to, he engaged in battle with the Commonwealth, looking to take bits and pieces here and there that he could hand out to his most loyal generals. His audacious declaration of America's return had earned David a huge reputation throughout Atlantica, and part of that was the welcoming of the Chowder folk back into society. Though they had been part of the Mayflower cult up to now, forgiveness was possible. The Gothamites and Chowder folk had been mortal enemies because of their divide on constitutional interpretations. But with that conflict over now, a new hybrid culture appeared called transatlantic, which combined the industrious nature of the Yankees up north, but kept the cosmopolitan lifestyle of the Gothamites. The Bostonian Minutemen became an integral part of the Atlantican army, and alongside the crossbows and heavily armored cavalry of this new fighting force, they would be unstoppable. Many minor campaigns took place as David worked on his own reputation, with smaller lands in New England coming under Atlantican control, but an important conflict out west would see the consumerists and the constitutionalists come to blows for the first time. The foolish industrialists of Monongahela had allied with the consumerist vanguard and looked to use them to attack America. It must have been a respectable sort of courage that would convince someone of their worthiness to declare war on the United States, and for that David would do them the honor of a total defeat. It would be interesting to face these consumerists and see if they can use their wealth to create armies that can protect it. The army was raised by Roanoke and then marched south to confront the combined industrialist and consumerist forces. They met in the hills of Gauley, where, despite their wealth, the consumerists couldn't back it up with steel. That wasn't to say that their fighting force wasn't impressive, as indeed they did fight hard and well. After Kanawha was retaken, the army marched into Monongahela, stormed its walls, then fought the consumerist army once more, defeating them for a second time. Turns out the Constitution is more powerful than the dollar. To celebrate this victory over the capitalists, David sent his armies to the Commonwealth to conquer a new state. They would take Tar Heel in the hopes of creating a new United Carolina once it's been secured. After facing the fierce consumerists, the Hoodoo Commonwealth was nothing at all, and David won with ease. He gave Tar Heel to a relative of his, Thaddeus, in the hopes of securing his family's control over the entirety of the United States once it takes power. There's no guarantee that David's direct line will always rule this land, but at least his family can continue to do so. From here, America had been, more or less, united, but David couldn't formalize it until he earned the respect necessary to become the president of the United States properly. He hadn't even been elected to the presidency yet, which he promised he would be soon. He can't possibly recreate America if he isn't the president. He was on a grand tour, checking in on his vassals and ensuring their loyalty, as well as hearing out their complaints. He used the opportunity to spread word of his presidential campaign, which would begin the moment the current president passed away, which shortly after did happen. In the election of 2792, there were just two candidates, David and Fitzhugh. Obviously, David won, with an astounding 1,993 votes to Fitzhugh's 1 vote. That's right, the only person that voted for Fitzhugh was himself. David held the greatest majority ever in American history and was ready to use it. To celebrate his victories, he held grand weddings for his children with the dual purpose of getting them married off, as well as making a massive party out of it. He needed to become a legend, and that would need some vanity. It's one thing to conquer places and be known for your martial abilities, but sometimes the president needs to rule in peacetime, and the president also needs to know how to throw a party. Grand wedding after grand wedding spread President David's name far enough that he eventually donned the sacred presidential sunglasses during a feast in Manhattan, and with his elegant hat, intimidating sunglasses, and presidential uniform, he waited for the feast to end before ratifying a new federal act. He named himself the President of the revived United States of America, earning himself the nickname Liberty. He included in that bill a legal name change for himself, where he became Washington Liberty Theobald, the President of the United States of America. Just look at this absolute lad. Won't lie, this has got to be the most American-looking president I could have imagined, and the sunglasses just really sell it for me. He dissolved the presidency as an institution next and linked it with the actual United States government so that whoever the president was would also be the leader of the actual government, and this did change his neat top hat to some kind of crown, but that's fine. As the president of the restored United States, Washington can declare war on any state holding territory in the old American borders to take an entire kingdom in one war, which is just amazing, but I don't plan to restore the old borders. That's a ton of war to have to get through. Instead, I'll demonstrate this CB's power by taking Alabama. Notice that this CB does not vassalize anything, it just conquers the entire de jure area as domain for the attackers, so you can basically wipe out the map and replace it with your culture and faith. Alabama was defeated, and with that we come to an end of this GIGACHAD story. Washington rules a massive United States, and with some effort he could definitely begin the process of restoring the United States to its full borders, which maybe I'll do sometime, but for now I'm going to give a quick statement about this mod. After the End is, for me, alongside Elder Kings 2, at the very top of total conversion mods. I got pretty blackpilled by total conversion mods after all the hype around A Game of Thrones, and the very earliest state of Elder Kings 2 when it first came out, but EK2 redeemed itself massively in my eyes with the devs polishing it up nicely, and this mod has sealed the deal for me. I think I've been converted on my anti-mod position. I used to be a pretty strictly vanilla Andy, but I think after having these extremely positive experiences, I'm much more willing to check out mods. I know people have wanted stuff like GIGACHAD for a while, and I know I only glanced at Princess of Darkness pretty briefly, so I'll be quite happy to give all the big total conversion mods another look in the near future. For now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and keep an eye out for the upcoming patch on my own Accumulated Legends mod. It's almost done, I promise, but I'm taking my time so I can do it right. Thank you for your time.